Now let's talk about dynamic resources. Just like we talked about static resources, dynamic resources also play a very vital role in case of theming or dynamic theming. So let's take the example of what we did earlier in window 4. I'm going to simply copy paste some sort of content into a new window. So I'll add a new file, window file. Let's name it as window 5. Then I'm going to copy paste couple of buttons over here. So let's have button 1, 2, 3, 4 or button 1 and 2, copy it from here and I'll add it in a stack panel. So instead of grid, we will make it as stack panel and then we'll have these couple of controls added over here. Ensure that we have written here something called static resource. As I said, static resource in a sense, the element called as style1 must exist. Now, obviously, in this example, button 1 has no knowledge about style1, stack panel has no knowledge about it, neither window has it, and in case of app.xaml, when we had added the style1 style2, I'm going to comment it now. So even app.xaml has no idea about style1.xaml. So obviously, when we try to tell here that run window 5 first, and window 5 has a button which expects style1, the code is going to go and fail, because static resource evaluation happens when you run the application. When visual tree is about to get constructed, you will find out, and if it won't find the element, you will always end up in an exception. So it must exist. The evaluation of a static resource happens at once. So in case of dynamic resources, so let's take an example here. If I just make sure that I change it to dynamic resource, so dynamic resource evaluation will happen whenever we need it. So when we run it, by default, during the creation of visual tree hierarchy, you will find out the button 1 tried to find style for itself. It won't find it. It checked with stack panel, it checked with window, it checked with app. It couldn't find it, and then ultimately it just, instead of giving exception, so dynamically it's a resource which can be dynamically added. So it just keeps quiet, and then it may expect some sort of dynamic resource later on, which means you're free to add the dynamic resource based on your need later on. But then this is something which is not healthy or good for the speed of your application. Dynamic resources, rather in case of memory as well, dynamic resources are more costly compared to static resources in terms of memory and in terms of speed as well. Because dynamic resources are going to get evaluated as and when there is a change in the resource and as and when there is a need for the resource. So when there was a need for a resource, it did check for resource. Now what I'm going to do is, I already have conveyed that I am going to bind this style with style1. So when there was a need, it was evaluated. It couldn't find one. But then later on, maybe on a button click, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to simply change the style to style1 to style2, or I'm going to load the styles dynamically. So just to ensure that we give some meaningful name to these buttons, I'm going to give a second button a name. Let's say change style or apply style. And then on click of this button, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write some code. So let's go to event handler. So on this button click, programmatically I wish to add style1 or style2. Keep it in mind, style1.xaml has got key called as style1 with red color, and style2.xaml also has got style1 as in key with yellow color. So I wish to apply style1 sometimes and sometimes style2 based on my need, based on any kind of a condition in code. So in such cases, what we can do is, the very first thing, where exactly these images or these files will be looked up, and who exactly is going to go and look up these files. So programmatically, we are going to go and do it. So in order to load programmatically these styles, we will have to use a class called as XAML reader. XAML reader will come from a namespace which is called as system.windows.markup. So we have to add system.windows.markup in the code. XAML reader has a simple static method called as load, which is going to expect from you a stream, ultimately a stream which will specify path of the file, which will have the style1 into it, or which will have, for that matter, any style into it. So how do I specify this? I'm going to create a new file stream object here. File stream class will come from system.io as a namespace. So I also will have to import system.io. So two namespaces I have imported, system.windows.markup and system.io. and then file stream will expect a parameter from you, that is which file you wish to load. In this case, I wish to load styles1.xaml, and then I need to open this file in a read mode. So I'll specify file access as in read. So I would like to read this file. Now when you say something like XAML reader dot load, it is going to return you one simple object, as you can notice here. Now this object is ultimately going to be entire resource dictionary. So I'm going to convert this into resource dictionary. So we'll mention here resource dictionary. This is representation of a resource dictionary we saw earlier. And then where exactly I want to apply it? I would like to apply it to current class object, which is window 5. So I'll mention this dot resources is equal to so and so. So now programmatically we try to ask XAML reader that read the style1.xaml, and whatsoever are the contents inside it, please make sure it is available as resource dictionary object and apply it to the current Windows resources. Which means what we did earlier over here by specifying something called as window resources, if you recall, window resources. So whatsoever we did here in the XAML, same thing we are trying to do programmatically, but then through code now in here. Again, where exactly style1.xaml will be looked up? You will find out style1.xaml is right now part of the project itself. So it won't look up into the project folder. By default, it will look up into the applications folder or output folder. So where exactly our exe exists? Exe exists in a bin debug folder. So we need to ensure that these two files are going to be there in case of bin debug folder. So for that purpose, I'm going to right click on these two files, and then I'm going to specify build action as I want these to be available as contents which can be copied, and I want these contents to be copied always. So if I compile my project now, and if you just quickly observe the output folder of 00 demo before we run it, notice we have got bin folder, we have got debug here, we have got these two files copied into the directory. So now what we wish to do is run this application. In case of window 5, we already have mentioned it's a dynamic resource we are looking for. Keep it in mind, we are just going to apply style1 out of style1.xaml and style2.xaml programmatically on the button click. But initially there is nothing specified like so and so is a style1. So let's run this. By default button will appear in the khaki color. Now what we need to do is let's click on the button. When I click on the button, you will notice that the button changes its color to red because dynamically we have applied the resource. What will happen if I go to code again and if I make it as style2.xaml? One more time we'll run it. One more time we'll click here and notice it changes it to yellow. So imagine there are two buttons or simple context menu we have, that is right click menu, and then based on maybe A or B as in clicks, what we can do is we can pick up style1.xaml or style2.xaml, or based on who has logged in, based on which machine we have scheduled this application to run, you can actually go and pick up style1, style2 and style_n kind of resources. But keep it in mind, this evaluation, since you change the resources over here, dynamic resource is going to get evaluated at this time, which means there will be some changes in the virtual tree, or rather the visual tree that we have in memory. And it is going to be a costly thing because it is going to want to impact multiple number of elements which are already there in the hierarchy. So as far as possible, whenever theming is required, whenever some sort of runtime styling is required, you can very well go for dynamic resources. But whenever it comes to something called as that the look and feel has to be like so and so way only, let's not go for dynamic resources. Let's stick to static resources. Static resources are much better than dynamic resources if the theming or dynamic UI change is not required in the project. So hopefully I made dynamic resources point clear to you.